Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating and air, restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Calls for accountability are growing louder as more people die in San Diego County jails. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. The Sheriff's Department says there have been 17 in-custody deaths this year. That's one short from last year's record of 18. But as KPBS reporter Tanya Thorne tells us, activists are taking issue with that count.
Outside the steps of San Diego's Hall of Justice, advocates continue to demand accountability for the in-custody deaths that have seen an uptick this year.
Another month of more in-custody deaths, and even now disputes about how many people have died in jail, 17, 18, 19. We have a record for this year, any number you want.
That's Dr. Darwin Fishman with the Racial Justice Coalition of San Diego. He says that as the number of in-custody deaths goes up, the San Diego County Sheriff's Department is looking for excuses. The Sheriff's Department says there have been 17 in-custody deaths this year, but they are not counting an inmate who'd gotten compassionate release to a local hospital.
We're definitely really worried that as the in-custody death rates go up and it looks more embarrassing to the Sheriff's Department, that they will find ways to cover up these deaths and try to explain them away.
Fishman criticized the San Diego County Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board, or CLERB, for not doing enough to hold law enforcement accountable for the deaths. CLERB looks at the deaths from an independent perspective to see if the death could have been prevented.
We had a history of not being timely and dropping the ball, quite frankly, several years ago.
Paul Parker is the executive officer of CLERB. He says he is pushing to be more proactive as in-custody deaths continue to rise.
You know, we can say all day long that the deputies did everything fine, but maybe there's something else that could have been done differently to prevent the deaths from that perspective.
Parker says that right now, CLERB doesn't have jurisdiction over the records of the medical services provided to a person in distress.
We're really only getting half of the story, right? We really can't look to see if the medical services providers did what they were supposed to do, acted in a timely fashion, administered the correct medications, took the proper steps when identifying a medical situation.
He is advocating for access to the medical service records, as well as cracking down on drugs getting into jail facilities. Tanya Thorne, KPBS News.
Another controversy in the San Dieguito Union High School District. This time, outrage over a picture of Adolf Hitler in a classroom at Carmel Valley Middle School. It was used for a history lesson displayed next to portraits of honored world leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. One parent demanded it be removed because of its insensitivity and insult to victims of the Holocaust. It was removed, but the incident comes in the middle of the most high holy days for the Jewish community, which continues to fight discrimination. KPBS education reporter MG Perez takes us on campus to talk with some high school students doing their part to share their faith.
This is the season of repentance. There's a 4-step process for repentance.
These students call themselves the Jew Club. It's an untraditional name, they say, honors their very traditional faith. They meet once a week at lunchtime here at Patrick Henry High School. Senior Zoe Linden has attended since she was a freshman, and every year there continue to be incidents of hate speech and discrimination against the Jewish community.
It makes me not want to embrace my religion and be open about it. It makes me want to not tell people.
So it's 5783, and it's the Jewish New Year.
Rabbi Devorah Marcus is often a guest speaker at the Lunchtime Club, especially now, during the Jewish High Holy Days. She is leader of the nearby Temple Emmanuel, which is celebrating Rosh Hashanah and preparing for the most holy day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. She comes to campus bearing gifts of apples and honey. She also brings a reality check and hard lessons about remaining faithful in the current political climate.
When we allow ourselves to identify anyone who we don't like as a Nazi or analogize people who we find to be politically unappealing as a Nazi, we allow ourselves to desensitize who and what the Nazis actually were.
The rabbi tells us that Jews are now in a period known as the Days of Awe, a time for them to be most open, vulnerable, and honest. It is also a time for forgiveness and to educate those who are against them. Memories of Pittsburgh and Poway are still fresh. In 2019, one woman was killed and 3 other people injured at the Shabbat of Poway by a self-proclaimed white supremacist on the last day of Passover. A year earlier, there was the anti-Semitic terrorist attack at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pennsylvania. 11 people dead, 6 were wounded, including several Holocaust survivors. Meanwhile, back on campus, the education continues.
It makes me sad because that someone would have those kind of feelings of hate. It makes me angry that it continues to happen.
I've had a lot of friends that have been more curious rather than more abrupt with their conversation and language towards me. So I'm really excited to really just keep educating actually and keep getting out there. It's a lot of fun to be part of the holidays.
There is the hope for a Happy New Year 5783. MG Perez, KPBS News.
Hurricane Ian is slamming Florida's Gulf Coast with near Category 5 strength. The monster storm packed winds of 155 miles per hour. Even before it hit, residents were dealing with mass flooding, power outages, and strong wind gusts. Ian's impact will likely be felt long after the storm moves on. Mike Valerio has more on how the federal government aims to help.
As Hurricane Ian slams Florida's west coast,
we'll be there at every step of the way.
President Joe Biden is promising federal resources to help. FEMA's top priority, search and rescue.
These teams will coordinate search and rescue efforts by land, air, and sea. We have 128,000 gallons of fuel remained ready for rapid deployment.
FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell says they have generators ready to restore power to critical infrastructure. They've also gathered 3.7 million meals and 3.5 million liters of water in Alabama.
There are multiple volunteer agencies that are staged and prepared to perform feeding operations as soon as it is safe to do so.
More than 2,000 flights canceled so far Wednesday, according to FlightAware. If the storm stays on its current track, flooding could cripple the I-4 and I-75 corridors, straining supply chains to and from the state. And while there are concerns damage to Florida's signature crop could cause the cost of oranges to spike, Ian is not expected to pose a major threat to national oil and gas supplies.
I want to add one more warning. That's warning to the oil and gas industry executives. Do not, let me repeat, do not use this as an excuse to raise gasoline prices or gouge the American people.
Mike Valerio, KPBS News.
The topic of hunger and nutrition was front and center today at a conference hosted by the White House. The goal is to take a closer look at ways to end food insecurity and decrease diseases caused by malnutrition by the year 2030. Today, President Joe Biden announced $8 billion in funding for projects to meet the goal. The San Diego Hunger Coalition says 1 in 4 people are food insecure here, and that includes about 33% of all children.
We're not seeing the wage increases that can cover the kind of price increases that people are facing right now. And this affects everything.
The coalition says almost 12 million meals more per month would be needed to achieve nutrition-secure San Diego population where everyone can access healthy food. It just got easier for developers to build housing on commercial land. Governor Gavin Newsom signed 2 laws today aimed at increasing housing production, including affordable units.
This is a moment on a journey to reconcile the original sin. The original sin of the state of California, and that's the issue of housing and affordability. It touches more things in more ways on more days than any other issue. It is at the core of the expression of so much of the frustration many of us have about our state and our future and the fragility of the moment we're living in.
Both new laws allow developers to bypass local laws to build housing on land set aside for businesses. One law requires a certain amount of the housing units be affordable. The other says the project must go through an environmental review process. Today, the governor also signed legislation expanding union rights for farm workers. The law expands the ways farm workers can vote in a union election, including by mail-in ballot and authorization card submitted to the California Agricultural Labor Relations Board. Under an additional agreement between the governor, United Farm Workers, and the California Labor Federation, clarifying language will be passed during next year's legislative session to address concerns around implementation and voting integrity. Kids as young as 4 years old can now go to transitional kindergarten in California, but those young kids couldn't go to aftercare. But that's all changing under a new law. KPBS reporter Claire Chugaser explains what this means for local families.
Sarah LaPietra has been figuring out the afternoons for her 4-year-old son, Teddy, who is a transitional kindergartner.
Initially, we were told that they had new after-school care classrooms coming and that they would be up and running by the first day of school, which was such great news.
Then the news was not so great because Teddy is not 4 years, 9 months old. He couldn't go to aftercare.
So we just scrambled and found a babysitter off of Facebook to help for some of the days, and other days we just juggled having a 4-year-old in the house while we did our work for 5 hours a day.
But that should now change with the signing of the Education Omnibus Bill. Courtney Baltiski is the Director of Advocacy for the San Diego YMCA.
Any child on school, so that includes TK now, is eligible for school-age licensed care.
Many schools get out at 2 p.m. and noon on Wednesdays, making it difficult for working parents to send their kids to TK. The law changes that, but Baltiski says it should have been done before the school year began.
This was a situation that potentially could have been avoided to add to that toxic stress that so many households are experiencing.
Stress like what has been happening in the LaPietra household for the past 2 weeks.
It kind of feels like the first few months of the pandemic where you're just kind of forced to juggle everything and handle everything on your own and left to kind of fend for yourself.
Claire Chugaser, KPBS News.
You will one day get money back for recycling wine and liquor bottles. The glass bottles are being added to California's recycling rebate program, but not until July of 2024. The state's recycling program includes beer cans and bottles, but not wine or spirits. Governor Newsom announced late yesterday that he had signed San Diego Senator Tony Atkins' bill into law. Atkins says the state generates more than 1 billion wine and liquor bottles every year. After a long meeting in front of an overflow crowd, Temecula City Council decided against advancing an anti-abortion proposal. But it may not be the end of the matter. KPBS reporter Kitty Alvarado tells us what's next.
Keep your religion out of our government!
People descended on Temecula City Hall Tuesday, some to protest and others to support a proposal to declare the city a sanctuary for the unborn.
Folks like you guys are looking at us going, you just want to say never, and a lot of folks on our side go, you guys just want to murder babies.
The proposal came from council member Jessica Alexander, who held up a model of a fetus as she explained the resolution.
But do we stand for death here in our city? And guess what? We're going to have to, at some point in time, meet our Maker, whether or not you're Christian or not, and believe in Jesus Christ. We're going to have to meet our Maker and say that we either chose to stand with him or against him. Because he does, excuse me, because these babies are his. No, shame on you.
The council voted 4-1 against putting the sanctuary resolution on a future agenda.
I didn't want to place it on the agenda also because it was not clear.
Marianne Edwards is the longest serving member on the council. She said she's made her pro-life stance clear, but the majority of the public comment was against Alexander's proposal.
You have to listen to the residents. And clearly we had 84% of the emails that we received were opposed to having it on the agenda. So I think that speaks volumes.
Mayor Matt Ron says the proposal failed because it lacked clarity. And he said there's a problem with how resolutions are presented in council meetings.
I could propose anything I want to, but it doesn't mean that we have the authority to work in that space. And without having that information from a city attorney or some more rigorous review, it's hard to have a conversation about any of it.
And that, he says, could have put the city in legal jeopardy. State Attorney General Rob Bonta threatened legal action if the council tries to limit reproductive choice.
All we have here are the comments of Council Member Alexander.
That's legal analyst Dan Eaton. He says without a written resolution, he can't determine if there's a conflict with state law.
We really will have to look at the particular proposal if it ever gets to that point.
Ron also had questions about a potential conflict of interest because Alexander is the director of Birth Choice, a pregnancy crisis clinic.
A general proposal that could have some broad effect on the industry in which she works probably wouldn't constitute a conflict of interest. But if there's some financial benefit to her employer, that raises a different issue.
For Temecula resident Brandy Kakoa, it's less about legalities and more about the city being turned into a spectacle.
It was a complete circus.
She said she was disappointed that Ron called out the media and the state attorney general about their response to the proposal, but didn't call out the resolution itself.
They dip and then they dodge and they try to place blame. And I hope best for our city. I hope that we can do better than this and move forward past this, because it was just an embarrassment tonight.
And that's one thing she and Ron can agree on.
What happens next is our community does need to heal.
Kitty Alvarado, KPBS News.
Smoking could soon be banned in all public spaces in Encinitas. The city has barred smoking at parks, beaches, trails, and within 20 feet of outdoor dining areas since 2014. If the latest proposal is adopted, the ban would also include sidewalks and roadways. City council members who support the idea say it would protect public health as well as the ocean from litter. They voted to put the proposal under review by city staff. San Diego scientists are taking a closer look at a massive underwater DDT dump site in the deep ocean waters between Catalina Island and Los Angeles. KPBS environment reporter Eric Anderson explains what they're hoping to find.
Researchers hope to find out just how dangerous the underwater habitat is near a notorious dump site in the San Pedro Basin. Underwater scans a year and a half ago revealed more than 27,000 decaying barrels on the ocean floor.
We're still trying to figure out how much DDT and related toxins were in those barrels and dumped in that barrel field. And that's one of the very first steps into understanding what the impact in terms of toxins is to our coastal environment.
Scientists use underwater drones to map more than 36,000 acres of the seafloor there. Researchers do not know how many of the barrels contain the dangerous chemical DDT or whether they held other toxic chemicals. Scientists want to know if the chemicals remain dangerous.
To what extent are they penetrating into the ecosystem, up to and including the creatures that we care a lot about, whether or not that's coastal fisheries or marine mammals or the fishing communities that rely on those marine resources.
The area was a chemical dumping ground in the 1930s, and shipping records from a disposal company say 2,000 barrels of DDT-laced sludge were dumped there every month for 15 years.
Is this DDT that's accumulating at these deep sites entering the marine food web at any level, specifically closest to where the dump site is?
Aluhari hopes to develop fingerprints of the chemical contamination so it can be traced.
And the idea is, can we show this sort of making its way through the food web that's at the deep basin into the food web that we're more familiar with, where we might be catching fish or the dolphins and seals might be accessing.
The federal government is spending more than $5 million on a host of studies that could help scientists determine if the dump is best left alone or if it needs to be cleaned up. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
Another hot day across the area. Those excessive heat warnings and heat advisories do expire as we head into the evening. And then good news on the way in our weather headlines that I do expect a cooler pattern as we head into the next several days, including the weekend. And why? Well, we'll get those onshore winds bringing us drier conditions too. So if you've been seeing the showers and storms the last couple of days, we should begin to dry on out. Cooler temperatures carry us into the weekend, and then a slight warming trend as we head into early next week. Looking at your lows as we head into tonight, we're dropping to similar numbers where we were over the last couple of nights. That means 60s, upper 60s in San Diego, Borrego Springs, around 73, and in the mountains dropping into the 50s. Tomorrow, more sunshine on tap, and we'll get some relief with some cooler temperatures. San Diego, 79, Oceanside, 81, but still hot there out in the desert with that triple-digit heat continuing as we go into our day tomorrow. As we head through the rest of the week, here's our pattern across the country. So we've got the drier air moving in, some more comfortable conditions, that big ridge bringing a lot of warmth to the south central, and then all eyes to Florida as Ian continues to bring destruction through its path through really the next several days. Looking at your 5-day outlook for the coast, we're talking about temperatures dropping as we head into the weekend, back into the 70s. So things looking pretty good with plenty of sunshine. As we head into the inland valleys, temperatures staying pretty warm into the upper 80s, and then seeing those temperatures drop as we head into the weekend, back into the low 80s with overnight temperatures in the 50s and 60s. In the mountains, temperatures dropping into the lower 70s as we head into the weekend. And when we look ahead to the desert, still staying hot. Your big cool down as temperatures into the upper 90s by Saturday before climbing back to the triple-digit heat by the end of the weekend and into next week. For KPBS, I'm meteorologist Ariella Scalise with your AccuWeather forecast.
A new treatment is offering hope for Alzheimer's patients after the drug makers released results from a recent clinical trial. Mandy Gaither has more on what the data shows and why some believe this is a promising step.
In the U.S., around 6 million people are living with Alzheimer's disease, but a new monoclonal antibody treatment is showing promising results, according to drug makers.
It's been a long time since we've had a development like this, potentially in the world of Alzheimer's.
The companies that make the drug say clinical trials show it slowed the rate of cognitive decline by about 27% in those studied. Some of the 1,800 people in the trial got the drug, while others got a placebo. Over 18 months, they were asked questions about memory, orientation, and problem solving.
And while 27% may not sound like a large number, in terms of being able to still be functional, if you have that sort of slowing of cognitive decline, that can be really significant.
In the trial, the treatment seemed to reduce the amount of plaques in the brain of a person with Alzheimer's disease.
It's not entirely clear what the relationship is between clearing plaques and improving cognition, but this drug seemed to do both.
While this treatment is promising, it's still early.
They still got to, put this through the peer review process. They've applied for accelerated approval from the FDA.
If the treatment is given the green light, it could be available as early as next year. For Health Minute, I'm Mandy Gaither.
Today, Qualcomm and the San Diego Workforce Partnership brought the world of science and engineering to Hoover High School. The idea was to convince students that are underrepresented in the field to aspire to STEM careers. KPBS science and technology reporter Thomas Fudge explains how they did it.
Careers in science and engineering are plentiful in San Diego, and some of these ninth graders at Hoover High are looking for a path to get there. Chloe Chen with the San Diego Workforce Partnership is a former teacher who says there are ways to inspire kids like this.
Having an adult in your life who can show you how useful it can be and how you can apply it, like I think these employees are doing today. And I think helping kids not to think in terms of I'm bad at a subject or good at a subject, but every subject is something that they can grow in.
STEM Day at Hoover High School tried to expose the kids to people who were not so different from them. Ninth grader Daniela Martinez said one of those Qualcomm employees was very inspiring.
She didn't come from a great school, and she just had to really motivate herself because everyone there just didn't really care, and she pushed herself. She said she kept trying even though she would fall at times.
The person Daniela spoke about was Olivia Carzales from Chicago, who now prototypes technology for cell phones and computers for Qualcomm.
My high school was very overpopulated and underfunded, and there was a lot of gang violence going on, so I always found it struggling to not give in to temptation with my peers of blowing off studying or blowing off assignments.
She says whenever she is concerned that she doesn't look like her peers or has a different background, she tries to push that out of her mind.
I never let it stop me from speaking my mind, from working hard, and facts are facts. My work is going to speak for itself, and I always let that overpower any sort of minority talk.
Camille Camejo is a software engineer for Qualcomm, originally from Connecticut. She says the adult in her life that drove and inspired her was her mother.
She would give me extra homework and tell my grandmother that I could not go outside and play until I finished the homework that she left and printed out. It was extra homework that my school did not even assign.
Camejo said she did not really think about the impact she would have just being present in a STEM career, but as an adult, she sees that she can inspire kids that look like her, and that made her want to speak to the kids at Hoover High School. Thomas Fudge, KPBS News.
Lizzo made history during the Washington, D.C. stop of her tour by playing a bit of history. That's an approximately 200-year-old crystal flute that Lizzo played at the Library of Congress. A French flute maker gifted the delicate woodwind to President James Madison back in 1813. And the Library of Congress kept the flute in its vault for decades before allowing Lizzo to play it at its facility and later on stage at her concert. Lizzo said playing the crystal instrument was like playing out of a wine glass. Very cool. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Good night.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating and air, restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley. And by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.